Welcome to my art form.
It's time for Post-Orthodoxy, a show about changing our minds.
Yeah, baby.
With your hosts, Dark and Ainsley Sevier.
Maybe what they believe about reality isn't all of reality.
What?
I know, right?
We're on a mission to have a better time with more people more often.
The question is more, how do you get there?
Post-Orthodoxy explores strongly held beliefs, how those belief systems divide or connect people, and what might be found beyond those reality bubbles.
Keep calm. Don't lose your head.
I've got a piece of chocolate here with me because I got anxiety about doing this.
Welcome to this neighborhood, neighbor.
And we're live on the internet.
Live streaming.
It's true.
Welcome to the Post-Orthodoxy live stream.
Yes.
It only becomes a podcast later.
If we can find an editor.
Yeah, we need an editor. If you know anybody that likes to work from home in these COVID times and is proficient at listening to content and finding a good edit for us, and then adding some hashtags to perhaps the relevant things that may have come up in the course of the show. We're looking for an editor.
Send them our way.
It's a paying job, so let us know what you think.
Yeah, and then it will be turned into a podcast.
Then it'll be a podcast. But right now, it is the Post-Orthodoxy live stream.
It's true, which means we want you to participate. We have this lovely chat bot in the middle of our screen, and that's where all of your comments go, whether you're watching us on Facebook, Twitch, or YouTube, because it's an interactive conversation. Thank goodness somebody invented the internet, or we would have all been much lonelier this past year. Post-Orthodoxy is ahead of the curve, though, because we were doing interactive live stream conversations way on back in 2018 with Mokai Malope.
Correct.
During our Copacetic Conversations show that started on KBMF here in Butte. So we hope that you join us. Oh, Dark Sevier says, howdy and aloha.
Yeah, I'm just testing the chat.
It's down here.
See if it works.
So the format of Post-Orthodoxy is twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays, currently at 7 p.m. Montana time. And what we do is Mondays we kind of range around a topic bubble of some kind. We've discussed water and pipelines. We've discussed trauma and trauma awareness, and oddly, the Enneagram. And this week we're sort of starting with the environment and working our way outwards from there. And then Thursdays,
it could go in any direction.
It could go in any direction. Yeah. Lots of things are connected to the environment. And then Thursdays, we have a guest on, somebody that we find interesting and smart, who is a part of our life that we hope to introduce to your life so that you can get to know them and get to know your neighbors, and we can get to know our neighbor a little bit better too. Would you like to read our disclaimer before we go any further, my dear?
Yeah, I would like to read a disclaimer. This is a viewer discretion. So if you're watching this, we care about you.
We do.
We don't want you to be injured by information that you're not prepared for.
We have done our best to mitigate our behavior over the break between season 1 and season 2. We learned some things, and we realized that we were perhaps being a little too jolly, a little too excited about discussing difficult topics when it's actually something that's very threatening or uncomfortable for other people.
Right. We've settled on a new term for us here on this program, and we are social extremophiles. We have maybe taken for granted that we're swimming in waters that are a little more, waters that are a little more acidic.
We're used to it.
Yeah, I'm adapted to harsh realities that maybe the regular default reality doesn't have in its daily milieu.
Doesn't have to deal with.
Right.
We've had to deal with changing our minds, shifting our perspective on realities. And not everybody has had to do that in order to be happy and healthy. And so for some people, when we come along, we're like, well, but what if you were wrong?
Yeah, we don't want to be cavalier with people's strongly held beliefs, convictions, and fundamentalisms, but that's what we're going to be talking about.
And so
So if you start to feel yourself getting irritated, you can comment. This is why we have opened up the comment section. So if you feel like we've gone overboard or we are completely wrong for some reason, or that you have some source that might be able to
debunk something
we've said, we have this chat open for you to be involved in the dialogue. This is more of a conversation than anything else. It's a conversation between Ainsley and myself. It's also a growing conversation between our audience and ourselves, hence this current format with a big blue space between the two of us. I just want to say, as a content warning and viewer discretion, the opinions and views expressed by Dark and Ainsley on this show may future Dark and Ainsley or past Dark and Ainsley may not agree with. So things might... We are open to changing our minds, what we're saying, and we're not coming from... We are aware of our own biases, and we're hoping to change them where they are no longer productive or they become unproductive.
Right.
So anyway, that's the general idea, is if you get mad, go away or get involved.
Yeah. Either one is fine.
Yep.
We absolutely don't want you to get mad and just think that we don't want to hear from you.
Chef Boyardee is in the house. Chef
Boyardee. We have several people joining us on Twitch today. 00 Tyler Pite. PYT, like pyrotechnic.
Oh, hi.
Another TV viewer who's a viewer from season 1, Henty Chan, and Industrial Parasite, who I have not met before.
Oh, right on. Hi,
as well as Chef Boyardee.
Welcome to the program.
Welcome to the show.
So Thursday is our guest.
Thursday is our guest day, and we have a guest who has kindly made time for us in the midst of having a newborn child. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Evno Omni from Hawaii.
Honolulu. Welcome to the show.
I guess I need to unmute myself.
Yeah, that helps.
Ta-da! It's lovely to have you here, Evno, after so many weeks of you joining us, of us joining you on your radio show.
Definitely a pleasure. We should be spreading the words as far and wide as we can, to use the outdated religious iconography of it, right? We're all on a mission to save mankind, whatever that looks like to us.
I like what I watched the little tiny documentary Netflix did about Ram Dass a couple of years ago, and I like what he says at the end, that we're all just walking each other home.
Indeed. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the issue, right? Is people have different ideas about what home are. Mm-hmm. And so instead of, most of the paths are in the same direction. People are like, no, my home's better than yours, and get into
you're doing it wrong
and wars and everything else.
They do,
determining
it's true.
What's going on.
And well, for folks that aren't privy to the relationship, I've known Evno for over 20 years now. Met him in Honolulu when I was running an open mic, and since we were censored, gagged, and scrubbed and terminated from KBMF, Evno has given us a half-hour slot on his show called Know Thyself on KTUH Honolulu. Do you want to tell folks maybe
what's the local time? 9 a.m. to noon?
Yeah. So every Sunday morning, Hawaii time, 9 a.m. to noon. So I believe that would be
2:30 Montana time.
1 p.m. till 5 p.m. your time.
Right.
Yeah. We always join in.
And you guys have been in the middle of that, and I definitely appreciate that. And, what we've been trying to do with the show is the same thing I try and do with my classes, which is get people to reflect and look inwards a little bit better. That's the nice thing about philosophy is you're never telling people what to think. It's all about how to think, how to use things like evidence and inquiry and all of that other amazing stuff.
Critical thinking.
Actually process stuff rather than repeating the sound bites we may hear.
Absolutely. And so what
a task.
Do you teach more than one class?
I mean, it depends on the semester. I don't know how many of your listeners or yourselves are familiar with what's been going on in academia these days, but I have been stuck in being an adjunct lecturer for the last 10 years. So that means whatever classes that are extra they give me, but I end up being a gig worker and not knowing how much work I will get in the next semester.
Why is that happening?
Year. And so, like, in this past year, I went from having 5 classes a year ago, and generally entry stuff like intro to philosophy, intro to ethics, and I've had the privilege of, for the last year, of teaching a women's studies course. But, you know, at the same time, enrollments have gone down since the universities have switched to online-only classes, and therefore they have no need for adjunct lecturers.
In spite of what intellectuals such as yourself may hope,
employed.
Lots of people just go to college for the social.
Positions elsewhere, which, you know, I'm my position at the moment is, as you mentioned, I have a newborn, I have a toddler. I really like raising them here in Hawaii, and it doesn't look. I don't know if I'll be able to continue to do that. So.
Yeah, how are things in Hawaii? I know that we've made some updates with folks when you were on our show before we were banned from the radio station. We had some word from you on what was going on during the quarantine, because Hawaii is an island, a group of islands. But as an island entity, we were curious to see how they were handling this, the narrative of the pandemic and what things were put in place and what was the effect. And I think, I don't know if this number, it sounds fantastic, so you can correct me if I misremember this, but I think you said over 90% of local businesses went out of business during the pandemic. Have any of them come back or are coming back?
So, I mean, that was a projected number. You know, a number of places have gone out of business.
Or are coming back?
So, I mean, that the local businesses.
We lost the audio.
Did we lose him?
I'm here.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
seeing you guys.
Okay.
I'm hearing you guys.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on.
I can hear
Hopefully
you.
it didn't make me mute. No, I'm good.
We can
you
hear
hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
That's great.
I heard
So,
my own voice back to me for a second.
What's been going on in Hawaii is generally, you know, it was really hard. It still is. Bars are still only open till 12 and not allowed to have large groups, obviously. Restaurants are being back to open in dining for those that have chosen to do it. A lot of the smaller shops have closed. Certainly, you know, as Dark and I know, the live entertainment business has taken a big hit, and most of the gig workers there have been really suffering. But, you know, people have gotten by. And to answer James, who said he couldn't do online classes only, I fully understand. For me, it's hard because in philosophy, a lot of our discipline is based around dialogue, right? Socrates never even wrote anything down. He would just question and challenge people where they stood. And so what I try to do is get my students to ask questions themselves or ask questions of them and participate in the dialogue. So I fully understand not feeling comfortable doing that in an online only setting. I have found ways to get around it that my students have said they appreciate. I won't go into the details of that now, but, you know, yes, it is harder. And it's harder for me as well, because it's much harder to get that energy going across a tiny screen. But, you know, here we are. This is the realm we're in. You guys asked me what it's been like in Hawaii. Aside from the closures, you know, we had a lot of close downs, but most of our issues were with people coming in.
Right.
We, as an island, you know, or a set of islands, we have the advantage of everyone who's coming in is coming in by plane. And so regulations and things can be put into place at the airports that will cover everyone coming in. You can't sneak in a car or whatever else. Maybe you can by boat, but if you're doing it by boat, you've been stuck on a small space for 14 days at least anyway.
Right.
So you're either dead by the time you get there or you're fine.
Or you're not sick, not contagious anymore.
Right. So, you know,
That's
so
your
all
quarantine.
of that's been going on. We were lucky compared to some. The lockdowns didn't get quite as bad as in some places. There was a funny period towards the beginning where, I know a lot of places close down, even parks and beaches.
Which is weird.
Yeah.
But which was weird. We all thought it was weird. They shut down the hiking trails for about 3 weeks before that had enough feedback that that wasn't going on.
How is that medically helpful?
They knew here that they could not get away with that. So it was funny. The worst that it was the beaches were closed, but the ocean was open. So you could walk across the beach to get in the water, and you were fine as long as you were in the water and exercising. But if you were sitting down or laying down on the beach, you could be fine.
Wow.
So Hawaii places like California where the beaches were just shut down entirely.
Right. Hawaii is such a social place. It's a very social place. Right. In Montana, I think people get used to long winters where they might spend more time indoors and more time in solitude. And I think you have to live here. If you're going to live here, you have to be okay with that on some level. And maybe the nightlife contributes. However, I think not having the nightlife and the solitude of winter has made it really weird for a lot of people trying to come out. People are now having social anxieties they didn't have before. People are forgetting what it was like to relate because they've been in their head so long. I'm actually watching people, they look like those like little fish that come out of a cave with no light. They're a little pale, and they're not sure. There's like a delay in real life.
You kind of have some
instead of on Zoom.
Hindbrain alarms going off. Like, maybe this is unsafe. I don't know. And then, but your frontal lobe is like, no, it's all right. And
so I was just wondering how it was for folks coming out there, if the isolation had been so bad that people forgot how to deal with people like some folks here have, or if it wasn't as harsh there.
I mean, I think that some people have gone through that. I certainly know people that have been in fear of this and are still, not wanting to come out of the house. Although I think that for a lot of us here in Hawaii, our go-to when we're feeling alone is to go into nature, right? Mm-hmm. That's the beach or the forest or just a walk along a stream bed. And the thing is we're spoiled in that's always accessible to us year round. Yeah. I mean, right now where I'm at, this is my lanai. It's part of the house, but it's still mostly outdoor, right? So,
right. And you can be outdoors because it's not trying to kill you.
Right. No, it's never trying to kill you here. And that's why in some ways Hawaii is the easy mode of living.
Oh gosh.
Although it's more expensive than most places, it's also the place I'd rather be without any money because I'm never going to starve and I'm never going to go cold here.
Yep.
But, at the same time, the median price of a house is now just a few thousand short of $1 million.
Oh my.
Yeah.
That's the median price.
That's the median price.
Oof.
Yeah, I remember I was in Kailua, which is sort of like a Beverly Hills section of Oahu. Nice beach houses close to the beach. And a friend of mine told me that during the Japanese economic bubble that he remembers coming out to his lawn to water his lawn, and he saw a real estate agent with a Japanese man, and the man was just looking down the street and pointing and going, I like this one, no, not that one, this one, and let's just get this block. They had so much money, the Japanese came in and just bought everything.
Wow.
And that, helps drive up the prices. Everybody wants a piece of paradise, and if you have a lot of money, you can have a lot of paradise.
Even in places that are not necessarily high class, that may be within a block or two of a public housing development and things like that.
So that was like 1998, 1997 when that happened. So yeah, things have changed. Like Butte is one of those places where it's sort of been it's in a different sine wave than the rest of the economies of Montana or even the country. It always seems to be in a different part of the sine wave. So during the Depression, this town was bawling because electricity had started, and this is where all the copper was. So it was a boom town when everybody else was bust. And then there was a labor union fight to make sure that there was room for a middle class. And by the time that started to become a national thing, copper failed and the middle class was done here, and suddenly the rest of the country had it. So we've always sort of been in a different wave. And during the real estate bubble, nothing happened here. The real estate prices had not changed very much up or down. But now things have changed suddenly. And this is what we warned about before we got kicked off the radio station, was that with the lockdown, people are missing their homes, they're losing their businesses, and that the banks were going to come through and just start swooping and like a feeding frenzy, because one group of investors started buying up other properties. People thought, well, I better buy up some properties. And now you cannot find a place to rent. And the houses, people are going up and offering double for whatever you paid for your house just to buy it off of you. And that's all happened since the beginning of this year.
Yeah, it makes sense because, with so many people working remotely now, a lot of people, well, I mean, I can do this all the time. I'm, just as productive. We don't have to pay for office space. And so a lot of people are like, well, where can I live? I mean, I know that it's caused a huge bust out or boom out here as well. My wife has a friend from China that owns an apartment or two in Waikiki. And, so we've been put in charge of helping her rent those out. And when we do, it's like, oh, shoot, everybody that's applying is applying from the mainland or from elsewhere. And we can't even, get people who are interested in looking at it in person. So it's...
And that's a problem because...
Well, it's a problem because it's pricing the locals out of the market. And there's very few, the prices keep going up, and the people that are here that, are making 20, 30,000 a year can't afford to live here. Same
is happening in this town.
Yeah.
I was talking to a guy who was a DJ at the station who's literally homeless now because he got a divorce, tried to find another place, and he cannot find a place to rent.
Nowhere.
And
so
that's
exactly, and the thing is, on the mainland, at least you guys can say, oh, you can deal with a longer commute. You can live in a smaller town, 10, 15, 30 miles away. Right. Whereas here, being on an island, you can't, add commute to lessen price.
Oh, right. Yeah. It's just all close enough to be expensive.
Right. Butte has become a bedroom community for Bozeman. I used to joke that in Montana, like the islands of Hawaii, the cities here are islands unto themselves because it's 2 hours between everywhere. We don't have just 20 minutes outside of the city, really. It's a city, and then it's just wilderness or farmland.
Really long commute.
Right. So the commutes are, for people here, they don't care. But for people on the island, think of, I'm going to go to Missoula, so that's only 2.5 hours away. So they're like islands. And this town, because Bozeman got to be so expensive, they've been calling it Bose Angeles since I moved here. It just blew up with tech companies, and suddenly 500 square foot house is $500,000. So people are finding it easier to buy a place in Butte and commute an hour through an over mile-high pass where they're closed regularly in the winter because of ice and snow. So people are willing to buy here and commute over 2 deadly passes to get to work rather than try to buy a place in Bozeman.
Right. Nuts.
Yeah. I have to admit, when I came to visit you guys, I almost thought I was going to die in that pass because it looked perfectly fine. Then there was a big cloud, and then the rain was coming down so hard that I could not see through the windshield, even with the wipers on full blast.
Suddenly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's summertime.
We have Christian Betchloff tuned in. Friend of the show from season 1. He used to listen to Post-Orthodoxy when we were on KBMF.
Yeah, calling in from Germany, right?
From Germany, I believe. Yes. He happens to be up working late.
Oh, nice.
Because it's like 3 a.m. in Europe right now, from what I know.
Welcome to the show.
And Christian, he says they're still on lockdown.
Oh, my goodness.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
and
can't
some
go
places,
out and take a walk?
or... India's going off right now in terms of the thing. Yeah, I still have people in my circle who think the entire virus is a hoax. I have people that have been really ill. I know people who have died. At the same time, I also know people that have gotten serious side effects to the vaccine and things like that. So it's really weird, but it's also, because I'm answering your question on how is the post-COVID situation. I don't think we're post-COVID.
That's why I put it in quotes.
It's, the physical damage of the disease is not anymore, but there's a big cultural divide between those that, want everyone to be vaccinated and those that want no one to be vaccinated. And, for me, I'm trying to stay out of it entirely just because that's not a hill I want to die on either side.
Right.
Yes. Woo.
We have kept, we're on COVID light in season 2 so far. We're not opening up the door. One, because I haven't had the chance we were doing regular research on COVID science.
Several hours a week. Yeah.
Science and policy, speculation theory, we were looking at sort of all the new information we could find coming out to find out what was going on. And in the 7 months between season 1 and season 2, I wasn't doing that deep dive research, and I feel a little behind the curve. So I don't know if I really know what's going on. And maybe we can have a guest on sometime that is willing to die on that hill and tell us what's going on out there. But I'm looking forward to diving into that. But I'm sort of on the outs to know what's going on with the COVID story right now.
We kind of we spent so much of season 1 just talking about it. It was always a portion of the show each week. And for a while there, it was the whole show just because it was such a major issue. And it was weirdly and inappropriately tied into a major election. And so it was this constant intersection between what people thought about COVID and how people were going to vote. And we were always trying to talk about how those should be two different things.
Right.
And it ruffled some feathers, obviously, but we've really been focusing on everything except COVID in season 2. And that's not to say we can't talk about it, but we haven't been keeping up on any numbers.
I understand, but you asked the post-COVID question.
Oh, yeah.
It was funny because I brought somebody who was quite proud they had a vaccine to a gathering where everybody was talking about how they didn't want it. And it's just okay, how do you respect other people's views if you think they're damaging themselves or the community on either side?
If you think that their views is going to cause harm to someone else.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
That's what's been building with the political divide in this country is it's not a matter of policy. Now it's a matter of life and death.
Right.
Between the parties. They look at the other party not as a rival philosophy.
See that in the movement of police reform and other things. I know that we promised the listeners we would talk a bit about the environment today.
Yeah.
Did want to bring up President Biden's speech that he gave yesterday. I don't know if anyone paid attention to it. I know we don't want to get too political.
Let's get really political.
Yes.
We can get as political as you want. That's the whole point of the show.
We just specifically don't talk.
That's not my goal.
We specifically don't talk about the COVID right now because we aren't doing any research, whereas before we were doing research. So
same thing with Biden. I didn't watch his speech, but I'm totally happy to hear your breakdown.
I read a ton of headlines about people's reactions to his speech.
Right.
What did he say?
And so for me, it's much more a thing of they're platitudes. Most of what he said is the stuff that, the Green Party has been pushing for 10 years. And the progressives, who people call the squad, has been pushing for the last 2 years.
Right.
But much came down and much more a part of the things as they are. Right. It's like there's a huge deal about us rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement from 2005, which has been shown that it won't do anything for the levels that we need to reach.
But it makes you feel good.
It's virtue signaling. Yeah. So,
it's like it's amazing to me how many people buy these types of statements at face value. But I can tell you, in 1975 or 1980, Hawaii State passed a plan to be completely on renewable energy by 2010.
Okay.
How's that going?
Well, in 2010, we had maybe 3%.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's rough.
In 2021, we have maybe 40%.
Why do you think that is?
They're doing it is not being more helpful because, they're building these huge, 500-foot, 1,000-foot tall wind turbines right next to people's houses in Kahuku.
Oh, wow.
There is a low hum going through the town that's making people sick.
Oh, my goodness.
We all want to think that windmills are a great option.
It's obviously better.
Except if it's right in your backyard.
Right.
Yeah, the NIMBYs. And that's a real thing. I didn't think it was a real thing. I had a friend of mine who was in the desert, and she's by Palm Desert, which just has fields of these giant turbines, and you just see this spectrum, this whole galaxy of red lights on the hill around her. And she said she hated. I mean, she's like a psychic nun of the Catholic psychedelic persuasion. And she was all like, fuck these windmills, because she said it was driving her crazy.
Yeah. Well, and she doesn't get to see her horizon anymore.
Well, she's in the desert. She went out there because there's no noise.
Yeah.
You get to hear the crickets and the coyotes and the skirmishes between the rabbit and the fox over there. You get to hear that whole life, and now she doesn't hear any of it anymore.
And there's very little mention of, these huge turbines that are moving these giant metal objects are requiring hundreds of gallons of oil per turbine that themselves leak and cause damage to the surrounding environment.
Yeah, I imagine there's got to be a lot of lube.
It's a good idea. There needs to be a lot more precautions in place.
Christian says...
I'm surprised that here in Hawaii we haven't been doing, tidal energy like they are in some parts of England, where
that
they
seems
have
like a thing
that raise and lower with every tide and that but
yeah,
North Shore would rock it. Yeah. What did Christian say?
The king is dead. Long live the king.
What does that mean?
But that's a side note. I'm
on the environment.
I know that you mentioned something about James, so if you just wanted to tell me James' question, I'd be happy to answer it.
Well, my trouble was that it was a deeply philosophical question that I didn't grasp from his original text message, and so I was hoping he'd be willing to retype it out here just in case.
There he goes. It's been gone. So, do I think that harm, like incorrect idea, is more dangerous than a danger you learn to avoid? Probably. So I think that there are both. I don't think it's purely one or the other. I think there are incorrect ideas that can destroy the world. I also think that there are, ways of just avoiding the situation that will cause, things as we know it to end. But that's just the thing. Things as we know it are constantly ending. The trick is to figure out how to build some kind of future that we can believe in and that we feel useful towards. So, as an example, you bring up the close to you, the things like drugs. Well, part of the problem with people on drugs, and part of the reason it's so dangerous, is the war on drugs. Is the fact
a dangerous
that people
idea.
Can't help necessarily in a way that will not cause them grievous harm in the process. And it's like in many states, the treatment centers are far underfunded. In cases where it's been legalized, like Portugal and others, they've seen a drastic reduction in deaths by overdose. Not necessarily a reduction in usage, but not an increase in usage. But the whole idea here is, okay, what are our systems to bring things forward?
Harm prevention.
Christian says he tries to bring joy to people, and I think that that's it, right? I definitely get big into the ideas of, I conflate the ideas of Camus and the Bodhisattva vow, right? So for those who are not familiar, Camus has a brilliant 4-page essay called The Myth of Sisyphus, in which he talks about the Greek mythology of Sisyphus. And for those that don't know, Sisyphus died and he talked to Hades. And he said, because he had told his wife as a test, don't bother giving my body an honor or anything else. Just drag me into the middle of the street and throw me away.
Ooh.
And she did.
Oh.
Right?
He said so.
She listened to him.
Yeah.
But it was a test. And, he thought he failed. So he talked to Hades and said, you know what? I need to go back and chastise my wife for failing this test, for completely disrespecting my body, even though I asked her to, whatever. So Hades does this, and, Sisyphus goes back to chastise his wife, but he gets back to the realm of the living, and he says, oh, wow, I forgot how good this was. Forget chastising my wife. I'm going to stay here.
Whoops.
And so he lived on the lam from Hades and the other gods for like a year or 3, living life to the fullest, knowing that it's borrowed time. And they find him. And Hades takes him back and said, for what you did, for upsetting the balance of life and death, we're going to punish you as badly as we can think. And so the punishment that Hades gives Sisyphus is that he has to take this huge boulder. It's just big enough that a muscular man like him can push it up the hill, but it hurts, it's tiring, it causes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and it takes, depending on which version of the story you listen to, somewhere between weeks, months, up to years to push this boulder up the hill. Fine so far. Lots of us have felt that, struggling journey, whether it's in academia or in a job or in a project we want to complete. The catch was that every time he would get within centimeters of getting the boulder to the top of the hill, it would invariably roll down to the bottom again.
Ugh.
Right. So there's this constant feeling of ineffectuality, of not being useful.
He didn't have to pay for a gym membership. And I bet he looked awesome.
Well, yeah, he's dead. His physical body isn't really changing shape anyway.
Oh, I didn't know those were the rules.
Yeah. You have to do all this.
I didn't know if he was doing that in the afterlife,
he was
or
doing
if he was
in the afterlife.
Oh,
yeah.
What a gig! All right.
What a gig to spend the rest of eternity doing something with no results.
Right.
But it's still requiring your full effort. And so this was seen as the worst punishment they could do.
Mm.
But where Camus comes in is he's like, okay, we can see it like that, but we also, what is the problem of this punishment? The problem of this punishment is that Sisyphus is conscious. Sisyphus gets to reflect on his actions. And for, a conscious being, we want to feel useful. If he was just an automaton, if he was just a machine, we wouldn't think it was a punishment. Right? If he was an NPC, we wouldn't think that there was an issue with him pushing it down and rolling back down. It's only because he's thinking of it and he's reflecting that, it's useless, that it's a problem.
His awareness that it's useless.
Yeah. But what Camus says is that because he is a conscious being, because he is a reflective being, he has the ability to reinterpret his situation. Right? So instead of taking it as a punishment, he can think, oh, wow, I've been giving all this time. I don't need to do anything else. Yes, my body is pushing the boulder, but what happens if I look around and enjoy the view from this mountain? What if I don't place my value on whether or not the boulder makes it to the top because I know it will roll down again, but in the experiences I have along the way?
Woo.
And so he ends the essay by saying, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Right? Even if it's not tied to a particular goal or a particular end. Because at the meantime, if you're happy in the moments, then all those moments together, you were happy for that time. Whereas if you're only focusing on the goal and you never reach the goal, then you claim that you are unhappy for all of that time.
Oh. But you could have been happy along the way.
Right.
Yeah, well, we're
I dig that.
super goal-oriented.
Because the goal is never going to be reached anyway.
No.
And so I tend to attach this with the Bodhisattva vow. So for those that are unfamiliar, in Buddhism, the first truth of Buddhism, whatever form of Buddhism you believe in, because there are as many forms of Buddhism as there are Christianity these days. And, it gets very confusing. But, just like all Christianity say, yeah, Jesus Christ was a cool guy in some way. Every form of Buddhism starts with the Four Noble Truths.
What are the Four Noble Truths?
Okay, so
She's going to look them up and put them in the comments.
Four Noble Truths. The first Noble Truth, which is the most important to this long tirade, is that life is suffering, or that life contains suffering.
Life
depending
is
on
pain,
your
Highness.
So suffering is part of life. Okay. Second one is that suffering is caused by an attachment to desire. And the third and fourth are self-promotional, because the third is that there is a way to free yourself from this suffering. And the fourth is the way to free yourself is following the Eightfold Path of Buddhism.
Right.
And so, leaving aside the others, we need to understand that if you accept the first truth, that suffering is a given in this life, what are you going to do about it? So the early Buddhists start to think, okay, well, live a life of a monk, detach myself from this world, and my suffering will end.
That's one solution.
The later Buddhists, the Mahayana schools, including those of Tibetan, say, okay, but hold on. Who are you seeking enlightenment for? Who are you seeking freedom from suffering for? Because if you're looking at yourself, well, first of all, that's another desire you're attached to. And secondly, the self is just a mental construction anyway. So you're attached to this mental construction. And as long as you're only looking at that, then, you'll never reach enlightenment anyway. And so in the Mahayana tradition, the goal is not to free oneself from suffering, but, the ideal of the Bodhisattva. And the Bodhisattva is one that comes back after reaching some kind of enlightenment into the realm of suffering, into this world we call samsara that has, all the people, all the politics, all the mental constructions, what they call names and forms. And,
yeah.
Right. And it's like, okay, well, if I'm not worried about enlightenment for me because there is no me, then what I should do is work to reduce suffering as much as I can.
In general.
Right. Just if I see suffering, if I'm not going to cause any, and if I see ways that I can help reduce it, I'm going to help reduce it. Whether that's, spiritual teachings, whether that's feeding people, holding their hands on their deathbeds, or,
social justice.
Just causing a smile. I mean,
right.
Part of the reason that I surround myself with cute people and cute doggies, and hopefully it'll show up here before I go. It's just, if I walk down the street with a cute doggy, someone will smile just for the heck of it.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's beside the point. The whole idea is that, in that realm, it is understood that no matter how much we do, we're not going to end suffering. The goal of reducing suffering to zero is a non-fungible goal because it can never be reached. There are always new beings coming into being. There's always going to be suffering. The question is what we do in the meantime. And I feel in some ways like the current environmental aspect is part of that because, at least from the scientific reports I've seen, we've already passed any tipping point we were trying to avoid.
Right.
You know, I've already accepted the fact that my children will not get to experience the richness of nature that even I experienced growing up. And I know that, you know, I ran across a lot of bulldozed fields and the inability to get into the truly wild. At the same time, it's like, well, what can I do? I don't know. But you know, I can eat a vegetarian diet. That helps here. But I live on an island where everything gets shipped in. I drive less than most people, right? Because I don't need to drive 2 hours to get wherever I'm going. Most things are within 10 or 15 minutes. At the same time, I still drive. At the same time, I still, you know, heck, the only way we can put my toddler to sleep for a nap is to drive her in the car. And that is horrible to me. But I also don't know what else to do about it.
Well, there are
killing the environment for the sake of some goddamn peace and quiet.
There are economies to be considered, and the economy of getting the child to sleep versus you losing your mind.
Your suffering also matters to
Yes.
the universe.
Right.
But the thing is, Dark, I lost my mind long ago. I have no claims to sanity, especially in the way that modern society defines it. Because modern society is defining that, I mean, heck, my wife got in trouble with her insurance company because we wanted to have a home birth.
Yep.
You know, and so if that's what's seen as sane, I don't want to be sane, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother time.
I want to go back. Can I go back?
Get back?
I want to go back.
The boy in the blue sweater.
Yeah, in the back. Yeah, over here. I usually sit in the back because I don't want to be seen, but I want to be seen right now. So here's my question. So the first thing that you said from the Buddhist, the Four Noble Truths, is that what it was?
Yes.
So I would be really curious what the Sanskrit word
for suffering
that was interpreted for suffering means. Because I'm a big fan of Mr. Alan Watts. I think he's a smooth cat. Takes his time. He's got a little wry sense of humor. A little cheeky. I kind of like all that stuff. But if you don't know who Alan Watts was, he was sort of a hip translation, or I should say a hip interpretation of Buddhism to the West, England and the United States in particular.
And he was really focused on the Zen aspect.
The Zen aspect.
The way I've seen it translated most thing is discomfort.
Discomfort.
Right.
So that's what I think is really interesting, because the way that Alan Watts, one thing I learned that was really profound for me, because I'm not so much Zen, I have practiced Mahayana Buddhism for several years. So for me, he said basically that pain is what happens in life. It hurts to be born. It hurts to give birth. It hurts to learn to walk. It hurts to learn to love. These things all hurt, and that's pain, and that's inherent in life. But suffering, and the Western idea of suffering, is resistance to the pain that is inherent in life. And that if you can accept the pain, you don't suffer.
Which
right.
kind of makes sense with the Buddhist monks.
Right.
But it's also not just the physical pains you're talking about.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. The heart pains.
And the Buddha is very clear on this, that, you know, a lot of it is our separation from the things we want, right? We have the pains of want, right? We see somebody richer than us. Maybe we want a better car. Maybe we want a house that's not so drafty, you know, things like that. So those can be pains. Maybe we'll want someone to love us.
Right.
And that lack of what we want can cause pain or suffering as well. The other one is, you know, attachment to the things we already have, right? Because the idea is that, you know, you have parents, you may have children. Eventually, everyone you care about is going to leave in some way, and that will hurt. Right?
Sure.
You know, whether that's through death, whether that's through disagreement, disease, what have you. And so the question is, how do you deal with those emotional pains as well as the physical pains?
Yeah, that is a question.
Can you, you know, going to your point, accept those as part of the experience and enjoy those rather than having them cause you discomfort and dis-ease.
That sounds like the Sisyphean task. And that's what you were asking us to do with Sisyphus, is to basically alleviate suffering through mindfulness. Yes, through mindfulness of your task and deciding to change your mind about how you did that.
And it's also on redefining your task, right?
Right.
Because I think that a lot of the depression people feel is on this feeling of uselessness, right?
On the feeling of what?
And this is, something I've always thought, which is how I've ended up at, 40 some odd years old as an underemployed philosopher, right? Because I always was like, I want to do something meaningful. And I ended up in philosophy because I'm like, well, what's the most meaningful thing I can do?
Right.
And that question led down a whole nother set of rabbit holes. But at the same time, it's like what is meaningful and what most people see as actually improving the situation in the world are not things that pay, right? It's the amount of money you can make working for an oil company is far greater than the amount of money you can make if you're actually dedicating yourself to making our species harm on the planet less. And I run into the problem that I see most of the systems that we engage in, from the medical system as it currently is to the very commercial nature of our existence, the very fact that most people are buying or selling something to get by, and that we have an economy that is based on continual growth, which means continual exploitation of resources that are then consumed and then turned into waste as an endlessly growing process is not helpful. But that's not something that you can stand against in this system and still participate.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So I grew up in this country with this public education and the public relations story that America is a melting pot. We all come here, we get melted together, we're all totally equal. We're all on the same beam, and we just start from there. That was the story that I was told. And I think there's, since that education, I've had other perspectives. One of which is that in order to look at your neighbors, there's different bars that you can use. You can use financial. My neighbor is richer than I am. My neighbor is poorer than I am. It's a little more difficult to start quantifying consciousness or cognitive abilities whenever you're talking about your neighbors. And in this age where we talk about various forms of privilege, class privilege, race privilege,
cognitive privilege,
we're talking about cognitive privilege. There's a lot of people who are not functioning on the same cognitive level as, say, somebody with 3 philosophy degrees. So how do you bridge the gap between people who might be feeding a broken system or a system that is dangerous? How do you communicate with that level of awareness and consciousness without being condescending or shaming?
Or acting like that's lesser or one is greater.
Right. How do you take care of those people at their level of consciousness? How do you indicate, we talked about the environment on Monday's show, and I talked about propaganda from a government when it works. And I used the example of the crying Indian commercial in the 1970s. And suddenly people started feeling guilty for throwing their McDonald's containers out their window. Mm-hmm. Suddenly consciousness changed. And it was an emotional plea. It wasn't a logical plea. It was an emotional plea of seeing something, this indigenous something, because that's kind of the way it was portrayed, this idea of a pristine America crying because it was getting trashed. Mm-hmm. They used this Italian guy, Iron Eyes Cody, to be a Native American guy, and to have an emotional reaction, and we all cried with him.
Which was way more effective than charts of like, in 10 years, this much trash will be piled up on the farmlands.
Yeah, that stuff didn't matter. Once you got emotionally connected to the problem, people connected. And that's a whole other level of intelligence and consciousness. So I think for myself, we have a lot of divisions in the country, and they are of awareness and cognitive ability. And in order to talk to the largest group of people, the Republicans know how to do that. And the Democrats know how to do that. I think they're both doing it in a very cynical way. They're appealing emotionally to people in a way that causes a reaction and an identification. And when you're getting more intellectual with the problem and you're discussing stats and data, I think you lose a lot of people who just... Like, I know that I got a bad math brain. You start talking to me about what's in my bank account, and I start to fog out because I just fog out. And I think people are doing that when they start having to think beyond themselves. If they have to think beyond me and my family and my kids.
And my problems.
They start to fog out. It all gets really gray out there.
Yeah.
And I think different kinds of communication and different kinds of intelligence can bridge that gap. And philosophy is a wonderful tool. And I think that tool is limited and its ability to reach the larger audiences. I think it informs people who inform larger audiences, but I think that's part of the guy who's working an oil rig and making $150,000 a year.
Right.
He doesn't have a desire to save the planet. Yeah, go ahead.
For me, it's, as you say, you're not going to speak to everyone in the same way, and I don't try to. But the other thing with philosophy is you're not really trying to convince anyone of anything. You're trying to give them the tools to ask the questions for themselves.
Well, but now I feel like every show that we get on with you on KTUH on Sunday afternoons, it's some variation of how can we encourage people to XYZ, or how can we persuade people to get on board with XYZ?
Respect the environment.
Or how do we, perhaps philosophy itself is not so much about trying to get people to do something other than have cognitive intelligence. But you definitely seem like somebody, Evno, who is trying to find a way to inspire your fellow citizens to something.
I'm a big fan of harmony with each other, with the environment, and all I'm trying to do is get people to listen to each other enough that, some of the competitions between each other, between us and natural resources, lessen. And, I'm not sure I can get everyone to do that, but my idea is, how do I get people at least thinking about these things? How do I at least get people sowing the seeds of doubt, as it were? I mean, heck, you say philosophy doesn't have much on the internet, but it influences those who do.
Yes.
Again, Socrates was 2,500 years ago.
Right.
He was a drunkard in the middle of the public square.
Party.
Never wrote anything down. His wife, was destitute when he died. Not saying he was a shining example for anyone. But he had a smart student named Plato who wrote down everything he could remember. And in various ways, this shaped Western society. And so now we all know who Socrates is and give him credit.
It sounds like a longer game plan.
I don't even know it's a game plan, right? Because if we go with truly the Hindu and Buddhist modality, this is all an illusion anyway.
There was a phrase.
This goes back, and in the 2 minutes we have remaining, this is a perfect place, at least I think, to end it. Is that But the whole point of Sisyphus, the whole point of the Bodhisattva vow, is where it ends up doesn't really matter. The question is, what are you doing with the time you have?
Right now.
Is what you're doing with the time you have something you feel is productive? Because if it's something that whatever you're doing you don't feel is productive, you're going to feel miserable about yourself and your life, because we all want to be useful in some ways. So the question is what use are you seeing? And if the use is, as I believe it was Christian said earlier, to cause joy to others, well, that's a way of reducing suffering. If you can have joy and spread the joy, then that's doing something positive. if people are in a place of joy and comfort, they're going to be much more willing to look at alternative ways of doing things because they're not in fear that, things will change horrifically worse because they're comfortable in their own skins. So for me, it's just like, okay, I don't know if it's going to have an impact in the long run. What can I do in the meantime to make people look at things and question things a little bit differently and maybe enjoy their journey a little more, maybe feel a little more useful? And if I can do that, then I feel useful.
I feel as though our missions are aligned.
Yeah, I think, Evno, like I said, we've known each other for about 20 years, and I think you and I were sort of chewing on different ends of the same bone. Because for me, it was coming from an ultra right-wing conservative worldview and family and indoctrination, and then actually being able to live and connect with people and learn from people who were from what is diametrically the opposite of that. I felt like there were wonderful folks on both sides, as Donald Trump says. There were good people that were getting stereotyped. And I thought, why can't we all just get along? Why can't we have a conversation? And it became really clear to me because we're talking different language. We're talking different languages. We're using different parts of our brain, and we're downloading information in different parts of our brain, thinking that we're communicating. And it's that miscommunication that I think gets exploited into these political divides, religious divides, because as long as we're...
And that's the thing as well to realize, is that some people will use this, in the competitive mindset to change other people's minds, not for their benefit, but for one's own benefit.
Yes.
Right? I think the movie you've mentioned previously, The Century of Self, goes over this rather well in terms of showing, how people's language and thought patterns can be manipulated to be exploited. And that's, in some sense, what we are trying to rally against as much as we are against something. So I think that having the critical analysis is very helpful on that. But as you say, not everyone is capable at this moment of that critical analysis. But I have to say, having done things like Philosophy for Children, having worked at a center for IDD adults, those with intellectual disability, it's like everybody has a possibility to question things and consider different alternatives for the answer. Now, how much evidence you use and other things, that may be different. And what levels of evidence you use, yes, that's different on different levels. And sometimes emotive reactions are easier to get to than cognitive ones. We think this every time we see a very powerful movie, right? And most of the time, it's not because it made us think something, it's because it made us feel something.
Yep.
And so for me, the question is, okay, A, how do we get people thinking a little bit more and a little more openly rather than why to convince others that your opinion is better than the others? But also, and this is where I differ some, I'm all for brainwashing for a more harmonious world. I'm all for forms of propaganda that get people to treat each other better.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen.
We may not be so far apart because I do feel like, I've been actually really entertaining the idea of the benevolent dictator. And because there's folks stepping up into that role right now in the world. There's organizations stepping up into the role of the world. They're not democratic. They're just benevolent dictators. World Economic Forum, for example. Maybe if they know better than us and they can route around the system to give us a better world, I'm willing to listen to the story.
Well, I'm willing to listen to the story, but I think that there's also the assumption that what is knowing better? Right. The whole value judgments of better or worse can run into issues going back to the dogmas, that you guys escaped from in your childhood.
Right.
Yes.
And some people that they think what they're doing, knowing best, is trying to get everyone into heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And some people think what they're doing best is getting people out of church.
Instead of causing what is better or worse, I look at, okay, what is causing more suffering and what causes less suffering? This is why I really like the Buddhist take on it, because it's not about one person's view or another. It's about, okay, we have a clear metric to measure this by. How much pain is being caused? How much pain is being relieved? And they're a bit of a negative utilitarian in this, because it's like, okay, don't worry about the pleasure. The pleasure will take care of itself. Let's just worry about reducing pain as much as possible. And I think that that's probably the most objective way that one can approach any kind of morality or prescription for action.
I want to have a whole nother conversation with you sometime about harm and harm reduction and pain and definitions of pain and suffering, because coming from a conservative Christian environment, we did think we were reducing harm by trying to keep people from being gay. So it's not as universal of a metric as we would like it to be. Yes. But we should talk about pain, suffering, harm, and how do you define your general morality on another show. I think that we're going to have a lot of fun conversations together, Evno, and I appreciate you joining us.
I appreciate being here. I know that we've gone over time a little bit here.
It's our own platform. We can do what we want.
Go to it.
Yeah,
thank you again for the opportunity.
Yeah, there's no DJs coming in after us. We can go as long as we want.
Room.
I did want to say though, we're adding a component to this year's season. We're on a scavenger hunt for the smartest people in the world.
Yes.
So we're asking our guests who are here.
And our viewers.
And our viewers, also our viewers. This is an open invitation. Who is the smartest person you know? And
can we interview them?
And can we interview them? And it could be economics, it could be science, it could be geology, it could be theology, it could be phrenology. If somebody has a passion and a knowledge base that they are willing to impart with us, we're looking for those people and trying to find like 6 degrees of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. We're going to try to find like 6 degrees of the smartest people on the planet. We got to find out who the smartest person is. And also we're redefining what smart is. Is it emotional intelligence? Is it social intelligence? Is it there's ways to entertain that, but we're looking for the person that our guests go to for input, and who do you think we might? And it might be somebody you know, somebody you don't know. We'll do the groundwork to see if we can talk to them. And you don't have to say that right now, since we're going to have you as a regular guest.
Yes, be thinking about.
So we're going to be thinking about teams. So we're having our guests do that. So whenever we do get somebody like, hey, Joseph Myers suggested our next guest.
Yeah, throwback.
And then we can build like one of those pie charts on the wall. No, one of those. Like pool
like the
game.
murder board?
No, not the murder board. The trees. The elimination trees. I don't know. Anyway, that's what we're trying to do. So think of some folks that you think we might want to talk to.
Yeah.
All right. I will keep an open mind. I will come up with ideas. And thank you again.
Thank you, Evno.
Yeah, we'll have you get on the show. And thanks for coming on. And love to the family and aloha to everyone over there.
And thank you to our lurkers, people that join the show but don't ever say anything. We appreciate you coming up to us in bars and telling us that you like it.
Right. We understand why you don't want to get too closely associated with us in public.
Always the danger.
And we respect that. We respect that.
We do.
Back to Socrates, he advertised himself as the gadfly or the horsefly.
Yes, the gadfly.
Little pest that causes a bit of pain to wake people up. So.
Well, Evno, thank you so much, and kiss the bibis for us.
Yep.
All right. Kiss the babies. You guys have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Now what do?